privilege to participate with you at this Pastors' Council as we think deeply and are transformed by the mission of making God known in Europe. The topic for the morning is something that at first mention seems to belong in a high school classroom. And yet I think you will understand that we live at a time when leadership in government, in private institutions, even in small groups, is often held in suspicion. There are two reasons or end desires in this presentation this morning that I would like to achieve. The first is the realization, waiting for the PowerPoints. The first is the realization that a trustworthy God is never made known by untrustworthy people. And the second is that the most important human resource for the church is trust. The unrelenting flood of media stories about the moral and ethical mistakes and practices of leaders, whether in government, business, academia, or religion, creates an atmosphere of suspicion for virtually all who hold leadership positions. There is a crisis of confidence in leaders. If this is the prevailing atmosphere in society, how does it affect the church? I think you would agree that we both suffer from, and sometimes contribute to, a widespread negative view towards leaders. The underlying premise, as I mentioned, is that a most important human resource for the church is trust. When there is a generous supply of trust in leaders, in organizations, and their processes, all other kinds of resources become available. When there is loss of confidence in leaders and in their organizations, trouble abounds. Synergy and collaboration disappear, and precious resources are depleted, and mission gets paralyzed. Leadership occurs at the intersection of two basic factors: information and influence. Persons who possess these two things will demonstrate leadership, whether good or bad. Information involves the facts of the situation. The facts, the information that a person may have about a situation or an event. Influence depends upon the impact of a person's moral character, the excellence demonstrated in behavior patterns, and a collective reputation of moral behavior in an individual's life. This is why a code of conduct is an essential part of effective leadership. Personal morality and behavior, and the behavior it inspires, play a critical role in determining the influence factor of leadership. Persons in positions of leadership must accept the fact that their moral behavior will rarely, if ever, be neutral. Their words and deeds are heard and watched more closely than the words and deeds of others. A leader's personal choices are noticed and evaluated, often against higher standards than those which apply to persons who do not hold leadership positions. Furthermore, the microphone is always on. Virtually everything a leader says is analyzed, amplified, communicated, and often misrepresented. The leader's behavior needs to be consistent with the beliefs, policies, and values of the group being led. The aura of being involved in the work of God may blind leaders in religious organizations to ethical and compliance boundaries. One can too easily adopt the attitude that doing God's work legitimizes any means, including dishonesty, bribery, non-compliance with law, manipulation, unfairness, and injustice. Any means necessary to overcome obstacles or challenges. Highly questionable behavior is sometimes defended because it is for a good purpose. Such leaders need to ask themselves if a code of conduct for their role is really less rigorous than that expected elsewhere in society. On the contrary, a code of conduct for religious leaders may be far more demanding than for any other leadership position. Moses, surely one of the greatest leaders in history, taught that the ethical life of the nation in Israel was founded on the moral qualities of God. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality, nor take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. You shall follow what is altogether just, that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Developing a code of conduct is a task that one does in private. It involves careful and attentive thought to the question, what kind of person do I want to be? And for those who serve in leadership positions in a religious organization, the question is, what kind of person am I called to be? This kind of thinking and deciding results in a pattern of private and public behavior that may be described as a code of conduct. Here are 7 practices that merit consideration in a code of conduct: humility, integrity, trust, respect, accountability, collaboration, and excellence. In many respects, the concepts are interrelated. They function best when combined with each other. And the total effect of all working together is greater than the sum of the individual practices. Let us consider briefly each of the 7. First of all, humility. In our competitive culture, the notion of humility is sometimes thought of as weakness or insecurity. It is often assumed that leadership requires people with a huge ego, an overload of self-confidence, and the ability to blow one's own horn. Humility is not the absence of self-confidence. It is the maintenance of self-confidence without the need for pretense or arrogance. Humility is one of the great virtues, but like underclothes, is not meant for intentional display. The ego energy of a humble person is directed away from self towards the accomplishment of a noble purpose or objective. Humility carries with it a quiet confidence because it does not measure success by being first or best. Humility is not an Olympic sport. A humble person is neither boastful nor proud. The garment of humility is hard to counterfeit. But leadership carries with it several threats to humility. The attention and respect that comes with a role in leadership makes introspection difficult and weaknesses inadmissible. Leaders need to resist the illusion of being omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. No one person does everything well. Humble leaders demonstrate respect for predecessors, even if they've made mistakes. They show respect for colleagues, indeed for all people. And when the time comes to step down from a leadership role, they do so gracefully. They realize that leadership is not a right. It is both a privilege and a responsibility that is entrusted for a time. One of the best definitions of humility, I believe, comes from Andrew Murray. Humility is perfect quietness of heart. It is for me to have no trouble, never to be fretted or vexed or irritated or sore or disappointed. It is to expect nothing, to wonder at nothing that is done to me, to feel nothing done against me. It is to be at rest when nobody praises me and when I am blamed or despised. It is to have a blessed home in the Lord where I can go in and shut the door and kneel to my Father in secret and be at peace as in a deep sea of calmness when all around is trouble. It is the fruit of the Lord Jesus Christ's redemptive work on Calvary's cross, manifested in those of his own who are definitely subject to the Holy Spirit. In his letter to the church members at Philippi, Paul appealed for people to have the mind of Christ, who made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. I will be providing to the leadership of the Pastors' Council a PowerPoint that you will be able to have and use at your own discretion on these points. And for each of these concepts in the Leadership Code of Ethics, there is a graphic. But because the graphic has text that is too small to project on this size of screen, I've changed the format. You will be able to see the graphic in the PowerPoint given to you. For each one, there is a Bible text and then a series of behaviors that demonstrate that particular ethical concept. For humility, the text that we have chosen is, "For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Yet I am among you as the one who serves." I demonstrate humility by bringing attention to God, not to myself, by patterning my leadership upon Jesus' example, by giving others the credit due to them, by putting the needs of others ahead of my own, by seeking counsel and feedback from others, by being honest with myself before God, and recognizing my dependence upon Him. The second ethical code is integrity. Integrity, when applied to humans, refers to the moral quality of a person's character. When the term is applied to objects, it refers to the completeness, the wholeness, and the uncorrupted purity of a thing. These meanings indicate what is meant when integrity is used to describe human character. Integrity is the alignment of observable behavior with internal controlling purposes, which may be temporarily invisible. It's possible for observable behavior to obscure a person's real intentions. However, over the course of time, the invisibility of internal purposes becomes evident through observable behavior. The Africans have a very picturesque saying about this. For them, a crooked stick casts a crooked shadow. Far too often, news headlines these days describe the moral downfall of persons who have hitherto carried enormous responsibility and enjoyed public trust. And then suddenly, to everyone's amazement, the corroded inner life of the leader is exposed. Through perhaps an act of financial fraud, failure to tell the truth in a moment of crisis, unfaithfulness to a spouse, or the cancerous effects of nurturing a secret sin. Leaders of religious organizations are not immune to public failure. The environment of power and the accolades of colleagues can easily blind a person to the risks that accompany position and public visibility. It requires the inner life to anchor the public life. Jesus spoke in graphic terms about the contrasts between the outer and the inner life. The outside of cup and platter may be so clean as to glisten in the sun, but the inside is full of corruption and excess. Religious leaders might be as attractive as newly painted tombstones in a well-manicured cemetery, but the inviting exterior only hides inner decay. This is the tragedy of leaders failing to recognize the importance of the inner life and its role in integrity. When you guard your secret life with God, your public life will take care of itself. How then do we attend to the inner life, the character-building work that is so essential to integrity in public leadership? It happens primarily in what we do with our quiet time. Not what we do in public meetings, what we do with our quiet time, those moments of the day that are reserved for feeding and focusing the mind. Those periods in private when we wrestle with huge questions. What kind of person do I really intend to be? For what purpose am I living? To whom do I turn for mentoring? And what are the values by which I live? Ellen White cautioned and encouraged leaders by these words: "It's not the capabilities you now possess or ever will have that will give you success. It is that which the Lord can do for you. He longs to give you understanding in temporal as well as in spiritual matters. He can sharpen the intellect. He can give tact and skill. Put your talents into the work. Ask God for wisdom, and it will be given you." Building the inner life is the most important work that any leader can do. Placing oneself in the presence of God, listening to His Word, seeking His counsel, will bring stability and strength. The psalmist says, "The meek will He guide in judgment, and the meek will He teach His way." Society depends for its success on citizens of character, but it can do little to create them. Humanity's deepest motivations, its strongest virtues, and its blackest vices escape the control of government, any government. The greatest danger confronting society today is from individuals who can employ technology for widespread effects, while they reject the moral values that necessarily need to accompany the use of power. Two closely observed behaviors relating to integrity in a leader's life are how he or she deals with conflicts of interest and how he or she handles the communication of difficult or sensitive information. A leader must recognize that perceived conflicts of interest are as important as real conflicts of interest. And the ethical leader will be ever sensitive to the potential for conflict of interest and will take appropriate steps to prevent its operation. Leaders are seen to have integrity when they communicate with objectivity and fairness about their own actions and the actions of others, admitting mistakes, acknowledging that one does not have all the answers, sharing the bad news along with the good, and keeping commitments. Such are the behaviors of ethical leadership. Psalm 15 describes the kind of person who can stand in the presence of God. One of the characteristics is that he swears to his own hurt and does not change. Under this code of integrity, we have chosen the text, "Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart." I demonstrate integrity by living according to biblical values and principles, by acting always in the best interest of the church, by providing timely and accurate reports, by preserving transparency in decision-making processes, by disclosing and mitigating conflicts of interest, and realizing my own weaknesses and limitations. Ethical code content number 3 is trust. Possibly, this is the most important leadership trait in voluntary organizations. It's essential in governments, it's essential in business, But it seems to me it is even more essential when we come to the nonprofit sector and voluntary organizations. The development of trust towards someone in leadership finds its base in the interplay of moral character and competence. Leaders with upright character, that is, a reputation for moral excellence, but who lack competence, do not inspire trust. Similarly, those with unquestionable competence, but with questionable character, will not be regarded as trustworthy. Character and competence, teamed together, create a foundation for the growth of trust. Stephen M.R. Covey writes about the loss and restoration of trust in leadership. He says, generally, the quickest way to decrease trust is to violate a behavior of character. The quickest way to build trust is to demonstrate a behavior of competence. There are two kinds of trust to keep in mind. The first is personal trust. In other words, am I a trustworthy person? Questions of interpersonal trust are as old as human community. Remember, Jacob cheated his brother Esau. Laban cheated his nephew Jacob. Jacob's sons lied to him. It almost seems that it ran in the DNA. Critics of the Apostle Paul insinuated doubts about his honesty and integrity. Paul responded with a statement about the authenticity of his life. He says, "We have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God." For Paul, the complexities of ethical and moral decision-making were governed by the overwhelming awareness that he was called by God. Through God's mercy, he had been given a work to do. This conviction became his central reference point. Thus, the disciplinary code for his life was internal, not the result of external rules, of policies, guidelines, audits, or supervisors. The realization that his ministry comes by the grace of God compels him to live a life that builds trust. One of the most challenging issues in building trust is to have the wisdom and courage to maintain confidentiality when it is needed. Even though transparency is appropriately lauded as necessary, there are situations in which confidentiality is the better part of wisdom. Information is power. And having some that is not widely known can bring an almost irresistible temptation to disclose it. These two concepts, transparency and confidentiality, are not opposites, nor are they in conflict with each other. Transparency pertains to one's motives and intentions. Confidentiality pertains to how we deal with sensitive information about others. No leader should create the expectation that all information will always be placed in the public forum. The best interest of the organization and of individuals at times calls for careful and wise judgment as to what information is to be kept confidential. Am I a trustworthy person? The second kind of trust is organizational trust. The firm conviction that an organization's purposes are valid and its operations will be consistent with policies and public statements. Besides living in a way that builds personal trust, leaders in the church must collectively function in a manner that builds trust in the church as an organization. This is one of the most important global leadership tasks in the Seventh-day Adventist family. For the reality is that mistakes and failures occurring in one local church or local conference can be, and usually are, communicated instantly to many other locations around the globe. An attitude of distrust focused on a particular incident can quickly metabolize into a generalized distrust of the whole organization. This is especially true in the areas of employment practices and the management of resources. I've chosen Paul's text to illustrate trust. But in all things, we commend ourselves as ministers of God. I build trust by doing the right thing because it is right, by not exploiting the weakness of another, by admitting errors and weaknesses, by principle-based decisions in moments of crisis, by setting reasonable objectives and goals, by compliance with organizational policies, by extending trust to others, and by knowing when and how to maintain confidentiality. Our fourth concept is that of respect. Respect involves placing genuine value on a person or a thing. It means seeing an object, someone, or something for what it is in its own right, and not seeing it through the filters of my own desires, needs, or fears. I've grown to love the book of Deuteronomy because of its ethical content. In younger years, I thought of Deuteronomy as one of those books in Scripture that should be skipped over. But I find that it is so crucial for leadership. Here is a text from Deuteronomy. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Respect involves treating people with dignity, honesty, fairness, and integrity. It means that an organization's leaders will be committed to creating an organizational environment which assists in attracting, developing, and retaining a highly qualified, diverse, and dedicated workforce. Harassment or any conduct creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment will not be such a practice of an ethical leader. A culture of respect in an organization helps to create a safe and healthy workplace that is characterized by a sense of purpose, a sense of ownership, a sense of contribution, a sense of community, and a sense of camaraderie. In the interest of time, I pass by the next slide. Church leaders generally travel extensively and visit congregations and groups far removed from the activities and operations of a conference, union, division, or the general conference. Very often, church members do not understand church leadership roles clearly. They can easily expect that a representative from one of these church offices is really at the very center of things and therefore should know everything that is going on and is an authoritative source of knowledge on virtually any topic. A leader must be sensitive to this tendency and exercise caution, lest he or she, in expressing personal viewpoints and speaking from limited information, give the impression of speaking authoritatively for the whole church. Many a problem is created by individuals who speak beyond their scope and beyond their knowledge and beyond their role. No leader knows everything. When asked to comment on matters that really belong to the role of a colleague, it is an act of wisdom and respect to acknowledge the limitation of one's own understanding and to defer to others. Peter says, "Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king." I demonstrate respect by seeing all others as children of God, by speaking and acting with courtesy and respect, by abstaining from harassment and retaliation, by valuing the opinions and contributions of others, by affirming dignity, diversity, individuality, and giftedness, by listening attentively when others speak, by acting with fairness, justice, and mercy, and by honoring the rightful roles of colleagues. Ethical code number 5 is accountability. People have a right to expect leadership by example, a walk that illustrates the talk. Setting a good example involves being accountable to God, to the church, to one's employing organization. The Apostle Paul urged the Thessalonians to walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. To the Colossians he appealed, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Paul was often the focus of unjust criticism. In light of this, he described his own sense of accountability. We live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us. No one will find fault with our ministry. In everything we do, we show that we are true ministers of God. Although example is the most powerful rhetoric, accountability goes beyond being a good example. It means being realistic in making promises and then keeping them. It means respecting and protecting assets of the organization, including physical and intellectual property. It involves the appropriate use of resources with due consideration for effectiveness, efficiency, and the greatest need in furthering mission and for reduction of waste. Being accountable also means that a leader respects and abides by the policies of the organization, supports and advances the mission of the organization, and always makes decisions or judgments on the basis of what is best for the organization as a whole. People are called to lead within a specific context and framework of structure. It is required that they be loyal to the organization and to its purposes. However, this does not mean that there is no room for creativity, for initiative, for the questioning of long-held assumptions or policies, and for experimentation with new ideas. Trailblazers and pioneers perform valued service to any organization, provided they embrace their own accountability, seek counsel, and demonstrate loyalty. Besides taking responsibility for their own actions, leaders must learn how to hold others accountable. Performance expectations must be reasonable, clear, and understood. Good performance needs to be recognized, and performance shortfalls need to be addressed quickly and fairly. Accountability in leadership also involves each leader being answerable to his or her employing entity and to the systems and processes of the church as a whole. It is a principle within Seventh-day Adventist structure that everyone entrusted with leadership is under obligation for satisfactory performance and stewardship of office. Performance can be, should be, periodically assessed by the board, the executive committee, or the constituency. The processes through which a leader is held accountable need to be carefully defined and conducted by competent individuals that are free from conflicts of interest. Addressing leadership performance, especially when this involves dealing with mistakes or inadequacies, can result in very sensitive and tension-laden situations. However, delay in attending to leadership performance issues complicates rather than resolves them. Leaders who demonstrate accountability will speak with clarity about their views, positions, and convictions. Under the strong temptation to curry favor with someone, a leader may give room for widely varying interpretations about his or her viewpoint on sensitive matters. This allows people to arrive at unwarranted expectations, and when things don't turn out as expected, there is disappointment and distrust. Leaders need to express their convictions without leaving others in confusion or doubt. At the same time, they need to be open to seeing other viewpoints and employing dialogue and reason to resolve differences. Differences in viewpoints and perspectives can actually lead to better decision-making if handled well. Proverbs says, "To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." I demonstrate accountability by taking responsibility for my actions and behavior, by realizing my actions speak louder than words, by making only realistic promises, keeping promises, recognizing good performance and addressing performance shortfalls. And we must move on. The sixth point is collaboration. Certainly within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, any leader who believes that he or she is at the center of everything, with everything revolving around him or her, is headed for failure. Whatever leadership role one has is intricately connected to many other roles filled by other people. Effective leadership requires a team consciousness, not a celebrity mentality. Ellen White says, "Let not one man feel that his gift alone is sufficient for the work of God, that he alone can carry through a series of meetings and give perfection to the work. His methods may be good, yet varied gifts are essential. One man's mind is not to mold and fashion the work according to his special ideas." Leadership in an organization invariably requires talents and skills of more than one individual. The information age and the potential for people at every level in an organization to become specialists in a limited realm of information make it possible for leaders to appear at every level of organization. Further, the increasing volume of information makes it necessary to become interdependent, since no one can possibly know it all. The challenge of teamwork is to create a partnership that is complementary, productive, effective, and satisfying. Self-centered people cannot function well in a team. On a team, not every person needs to know everything. There are specialized roles that may be less visible than others. It is a sign of maturity and teamwork when a person can say, "That matter is best handled by my colleague." A person with team consciousness recognizes that every position is necessary. Each position has a specialized function. Each participant must know the rules and procedures. Team members must be in constant communication, and each team member does his best when there is mutual support and cooperation. The analogy of the body that Paul uses represents a foundational pattern for relationships among church members. It has significant implications for relationships among church entities. A primary value for Seventh-day Adventists is the idea of oneness or unity. The church strives to maintain a global identity and a global witness. The history of organizational development reveals an underlying conviction that together we can do more. Together we can do more. That has to be seen as the basic contributing philosophy to our organizational structure and our relationships. Two competing dynamics are at work in every growing organization: centralization and decentralization. In the Adventist Church, the purpose of centralization is more for coordination than for control. The purpose of decentralization is more for responsiveness to mission in local situations than for independence. Paul says to the Philippians, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. Let each esteem others." I leave you to read this slide as we move on to the final element in the code of conduct, that of excellence. The motive for Christian excellence stems not from rivalry with colleagues or competitors, but from the realization that this is how God works. Everything he does is characterized by excellence. Demonstrating professionalism is another way in which to think of excellence. However, one must be conscious of the subtle temptation to focus on the symbols of professionalism rather than its substance. Professionalism for a Christian is valued as a trait of character, rather than a tool of career advancement. It is the collective interplay of competency, conduct, and a consistent level of excellence in performance that yields high-quality outcomes. Excellence in a leader is demonstrated by an unwavering commitment to continued personal growth, to professionally advance with respect to responsibilities borne, relationally with respect to understanding and interacting with diversity of persons, groups, and viewpoints, to advance intellectually with respect to embracing an ever-enlarging grasp of the vast sum of knowledge, and spiritually with respect to deepening one's understanding of and walk with God. A leader's attitude toward excellence has an enormous influence on the culture of an organization. It can be argued the most important thing leaders do within an organization is to create and manage culture. People who demonstrate a commitment to excellence, to a discipline of continuous improvement, to doing the best they can, even when the work is hard or unnoticed, will have a lasting and uplifting influence on their colleagues. A commitment to excellence is more than focusing on competency, conduct, reliability, and consistency. In fact, it is best demonstrated when the focus and purpose is for the achievement of something outside of oneself. The best leaders are not the ones who are advancing their own interests. Instead, they work for the advancement of the organization and its mission, and largely lose sight of themselves in the process. It is a leader's ability to forget self that is often the mark of distinction. Therefore, a leader committed to excellence will invest heavily in the mentoring, training, and development of others. The Bible contains many illustrations of mentoring and the beneficial and lasting results that it brings. Think of Naomi and Ruth, Barnabas and John Mark, Paul and Timothy, Jesus and his disciples. Working to improve the skill level and knowledge of others should never be viewed as a threat to oneself. Instead, it is a badge of merit. The text I've chosen for excellence is from 2 Timothy. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved by Him. I demonstrate excellence by striving for consistency in high-quality outcomes from my work, in exhibiting a commitment to learning along with mastering my skill set, by meeting and exceeding minimum standards, by remaining steady when under pressure, by conducting my life in a way that honors God, and by mentoring, encouraging, and developing others for leadership roles. Every leader operates consciously or unconsciously according to a code of conduct. The natural human tendency is to act out of self-interest and self-preservation. The call to function in a role of leadership in the church assumes that one will be able to live and act above the level of self-centeredness. Developing, adopting, and committing to a code of conduct are important steps in building a foundation that sustains a career in servant leadership. After having prepared this manuscript, I learned about a code of ethics for pastors that was circulated in a recent copy of Christianity Today. It was developed by the National Association of Evangelicals. You can find the code on the internet. I have redacted it as follows: pursue integrity, be trustworthy, seek purity, embrace accountability, and facilitate fairness. May God amplify the effects of your leadership and mine as we follow a code of conduct.